On the first episode of the Loft Bed series, I told you we're about to see something that you haven't seen before. Now I'm here to tell you that there is more. You probably noticed that I have two doors to go outside, but have you ever wondered what might be between those two doors? This is exactly how I don't want it to look like, so let's change it. After putting a few thoughts in paper and working for a full week, I got this result. This is the beginning of my wannabe kitchen remodel and trying to make it closer to what it wants to be. But for now, let's go back to the start. I tried to organize myself by creating a cut list, and this part of the build was made using mostly leftover pieces of 15mm Baltic birch plywood from the previous project. So I started by slicing them and used the plunge saw to break some bigger pieces down that were too big for my table saw. I couldn't believe how quick it was to get perfect cuts in no time, with no additional measuring, no clamping. So cool. Then I went to the miter saw and cut the long strips to size and assembled them using dowels. It's just a matter of aligning the jig with a pencil line and drill the holes in both pieces. Insert the dowels and press everything together with clamps. This is the structure for the base of the cabinet, and I repeated the process for the backer part. I then trimmed off the end to make it perfectly straight, so I could connect a rectangle that will be the bottom piece of one of the sections. The other two sections that are open will have the drawers, so there's really no need to have complete bottoms here. I took some inspiration from Frank Howard's kitchen remodel videos that he did about 2 years ago, so there are a few steps on the process that are really similar. You should check him out, by the way. Frank does amazing stuff. I connected the back to the bottom using only screws with no glue because I want to be able to take this apart if someday I leave the space. It's really handy to have a driller and an impact driver so you can make holes with one and save time by picking up the other to drive the screws without effort. The dividers will have the drawer slides attached to them, and here I was trying to screw them, keeping everything as square as possible. Used a few clamps to keep the board in place while I attached it from behind and below. I wanted the drawers to be exactly the same size, so I made sure to put the second divider exactly in the middle. It was time to make the drawer boxes, and I didn't make anything fancy here. The boxes are smaller in height than the false fronts that you will see later, and although they have some variation in their heights, the base size is the same for all the boxes. That means I can set up a stop block in the miter saw and cut them exactly to the same size every time. But first I need to take it out of the way so I can make a clean cut on one end and then bring the stop block to make the repetitive cuts on the other ends. Now I need to know the exact size for the front and back pieces of the drawer, so I put the drawer slides inside the cabinet as well as the sides and took that measurement to the miter saw again. I used the option to plug power tools into the dust extractor so that every time I turn on the router table, both machines will automatically turn on. That's a really cool feature. I created a rabbet on all the drawer sides to make room for the bottoms, and I used again the planch saw to make the 9mm plywood boards easier to manage on the table saw. I wanted to use my crosscut sled, but the boards were too large and didn't fit inside the jig, so instead I went to the planch saw again and used this attachment that allows you to create angle cuts, and in this case I just set it to 90 degrees. First time you use the rails, you need to cut off the rubber strip on the edge to make it zero clearance, and then you can place the rail right on the pencil marks and you know that the cut will be exactly what you want it to be. Now that I got smaller material to handle, I can quickly cut the remaining bottoms on the table saw. Like I said before, nothing fancy here in terms of assembly. I simply glued and nailed the boxes together. Of course, this is not super strong, but it's certainly enough for what I'm going to use them for. I repeated the procedure for all the drawer boxes, and at some point I realized that the nail gun was out of nails. So here's a trick to know where is the last nail that you shot. You just pick up a magnet and run it close to the nail holes. If it doesn't catch, you know the hole doesn't have any nail inside. Now to work on the drawer fronts, I will be using a leftover board of yellow Valchromat. Since it is only 8mm thick, I decided to combine it with plywood so I could still use it for the face of the cabinet and get the proper thickness of a solid material to pull and push. I stick the pieces together with contact adhesive, and I totally recommend this method for gluing large pieces together. I should have used this before when making my desk, for example. Works really well. You don't need any clamps, it's just a matter of spreading the glue evenly on both materials and press them together after about 10 to 15 minutes. Just make sure you have your windows open so the air doesn't get toxic in your room, and be careful when placing them together because once they touch, you won't be able to move the pieces anymore. So in this case, I cut all the drawer fronts a little bit bigger so I can trim them to perfect size later and get fresh cleaned edges. I couldn't handle the heat on this day, so at some point I just closed the windows to get rid of the sunlight, but still I couldn't do much. I was just melting down. So I waited a couple hours and started to apply the drawer slides on the cabinet. Once the slides were attached to the cabinet, I used 2 aluminum strips to create a little gap in the bottom so that the drawer won't touch the base when I try to open it. I used the pocket hole jig to create some quick joinery for the top and bottom structure that you will see later. Then I just screw it on top. The drive bit set just arrived on the mail, so I can finally use the attachment that is proper for impact drivers. I was using regular bits that don't seem to work best on this case, and it really makes a difference to use proper driving attachments and bits, so there is no sliding or weird movements like I felt before. Now I will attach the bottom structure that is important to exist so that the cabinet raises and the tips of your feet have room beneath the drawers. The drawer fronts were trimmed to size and the slides were fixed in their place. I used a scrap piece to make a mark inside the cabinet walls with the front in place. Then I traced a line perpendicular to the edge and hold the slide in place to find 2 points for the screws by aligning the center of the holes with the center of the pencil line. Then I used 3mm spacers to create a gap and hold the drawer box halfway forward so I could find a point for the first screw. That point should be in the same place for all the drawers, and I already had that distance marked on my marking gauge, so I scored the line and reinforced it with a pencil just so that you can see it, and did that on both sides. Then I inserted the middle screw, and from there I could find a proper place for the rest of the screws, again aligning the center of the holes with the pencil line. Now for the handles. I didn't want anything protruding the surface, and I tried a bunch of ideas, but none of them seemed to match my taste, or they were too difficult to do or required special router bits or blades. So I ended up going for a basic and minimal look just by removing a shallow rectangle of material in the top center of each front. I used the X-carve because I made some tests on the table saw and the router, and I got a lot of tear out on the plywood backside, so that's why I ended up asking the carving machine to do it for me. Since this floor is pretty bad and uneven, I realized it was a better idea to define the correct place for the drawer fronts with the cabinet in place. I used the glue gun to stick the fronts to the boxes really quickly before driving a few screws from inside to secure them firmly. Now I can remove the little blocks on the bottom, and it's done for now. Still a lot of work to do, but for a first time making a cabinet, I think it came out just fine. The only experience that I have closer to this is the big shelf from the lock pad, and the construction is quite different since it was all configured by a bunch of boxes put together. So this really was a first time challenge, like pretty much everything that I've been doing in this channel. Okay, so this is what the project looks like so far. The drawers came out really nice, I think. They still need to be finished, of course. First, I will build the tower here and the enclosure for this, and apply the countertop, the ceramic hob, a sink with a kind of a portable water system. And I already attached this door just so that you can see the effect, but it's not trimmed yet because I'm missing this side, because this side it's gonna be the same material as the rest of the build, which is gonna be oak veneered plywood that I'm going to veneer myself. It's gonna be my first veneering experience. I just made a test here. I think it's not too bad for first experiment. And I think that's it. Oh, and this drawer, of course, this drawer won't be like this. I just made the drawer box exactly like this one with the same height, but this is going to be trimmed. And because I'm going to have the ceramic hob here, I need to leave some clearance. I need some space here. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and a big thanks to Bosch for sponsoring this video and for providing me a bunch of awesome tools. I can recommend any tool that I showed in this video. So far I'm having a great experience, and Bosch tools really allow me to have that little extra perfection to my work. So I'll catch you guys later.